Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Modern Market. This is our daily show from Monday to Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, 12 p.m. GMT. Every day of the week, we discuss all things to do with the modern market. That is the crypto market, the NFT market, and the ordinal halving Bitcoin market. We're going to get into everything that's been happening the past 24 hours, doing a little bit of looking forward as well to the very important halving event, which is going to be happening. We've got some graphs, we've got some opinions, we've got some takes to give. Cannot wait to get into that all with you in just a moment. But before we get there, I'm your host, Beecher. I'm joined by my legendary co-hosts, Legendary and Sammy. And a reminder before we get into it that nothing that we say here, no matter how much it may sound like it is not financial advice because we do not know what we are saying for sure. And this market is insanely risky. So please do proceed with caution and exercise your own judgment. With that out of the way, Legendary, it is Friday. It is the 19th of April. We are on a countdown to the halving, aka the halvening, as Sammy likes to call it. How are you feeling? How are you doing?
Pretty exciting day, or from my perspective, it's going to be a pretty exciting night, as it will go down like around my midnight. It is a historic day. I am quite excited. I think I do remember the last halving, but obviously ecosystem was way smaller back then. So I think it's super exciting. I think we've seen a hell of a lot of strong takes on the timeline in terms of what that will mean for future price action. I think Loopify came out super strong saying this is your last chance to buy ETH under 3.1K. From here, it's up only. So it's interesting when you have days like these coming up when people come out with predictions, and now you have that additional layer that we have runes, and we will probably have the day with the highest fees in Bitcoin tomorrow. So that will be interesting to see. I'm pretty certain that there will be massive wins that will be shared on the timeline, as well as massive losses and people burning through a shit ton of money. And I'm here for it. That's going to be hilarious.
I completely agree. There's going to be some big wins. There's going to be some big losses. There's going to be some big disasters. I feel we kind of touched on that in the last few days. Just like real kind of newbies setting up nodes, spinning up things. I actually speaking to some ordinals people here saying that they wanted to set it up and like they started the process and they actually pressed the abort button. They were like, they did step one, they bought the node. Then they looked at step two and it was like something that had no idea what it was saying to do. And they're like, no. Okay, I need to tap out here. So that's pretty funny. Kind of feeding into some of the sentiment we had expressed the last few days. Sammy, what are your thoughts on it? As Legendary said, very kind of historic moment that gets people quite excited when discussing it and thinking about it and talking about it. How are you thinking about it, maybe as it relates to the various Bitcoin assets now? You've got Bitcoin, you've got ordinals, and you've also got runes. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think having a general consensus around the protocol it seems to take wind. Obviously, Casey's come up with it, and it's seen as a superior version to BRC20. So intrigued to see what happens 12 hours from now when it lands in. I think it actually. So in our time zone, it is actually 4:20 when it hits. I think in America, it's still the 19th of April. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens. I think I'm kind of a little bit exposed, but not too much, because I am a little bit concerned that these assets, these pre-runes, are overinflated in price, and who knows whether they'll actually hit the market.
Look, I think that's a nice little expression of opinion, which want to dig into a little bit more later. I'm just having a look through the audience to see who we've got here. I've been having some spicy conversations about ordinals out here with ordinal people, actually, and a variety of people. Because I'm so sleep deprived, I feel like I might just let loose on some of these opinions that some people are literally talking about, like how they can't express them. We'll see how we go. I'm just seeing if there's anyone that's going to be hyper offended by some of these things that will shock the market. Potentially. No, I'm joking. There's nothing shocking as such, but I do think there's a hell of a lot of debate to be had, some of which from the conversations that I've been having, people feel like they can't have. So I want to talk about that as well as part of the conversation. We're going to get into all of the headlines in just a little bit and the broader discussions on that. We're going to do a little bit of recap of the news from the week and thinking about what the themes are that are important moving forward. Before we do that, Funky, your hand is raised. Welcome to the stage, my friend. You are a big Bitcoin proponent, big Bitcoin supporter. How are you feeling as we go into the halving?
I'm feeling great, especially knowing that B is about to be unleashed on the world. I just wanted to say that Satoshi is a straight up G for making the halving happen on 420. I don't care that it's going to happen on 419 here in the US. I'm counting it as 420 for the culture, for the memes. Couldn't be better.
It's pretty insane that it's going to land on 420. Like, I don't know how that was mathematically possible, but absolutely insane for sure. Look, let's Sammy, I'm reading your comments in the chat. Okay, let's get into the show. Starting with the headlines, as always, and some price action from the snapshot, which is pinned up top. If you do find it brings you some value today, it would be helpful if you gave it a like, and why not even give it a retweet? How about that? That would be kind of nice too. Right, let's get into it. Let's do some price action first, actually. Bitcoin is up 5% at 64K, almost 65K. Ethereum is up 3% at $3,000, almost 3.1K. Solana is up 10% at $140. In terms of some NFT price action, let's go in that direction. We're going in a bit of a different order today. We've got Mutant Apes down 1% at 2 ETH. We got CryptoPunks at 40-ish. We've got Bored Apes at 11.8. DGods at 1.3. Pudgy Penguins at 10.5, up a couple of percent. Azuki's up a few percent at 3.8. Nothing really catching the attention there, though we'll ask the boys in a second if there is something from their perspective. Getting into the headlines, we have Israel missiles reportedly hitting a site in Iran, but this time crypto seems to be responding well, not like the other day. Remember, we'll keep reporting about this stuff as it relates to crypto. There's all kinds of stuff we could talk about when it comes to geopolitics. We will not be touching on all of those angles. We're just going to be talking about it as it relates to the price action and things to do with that. Number 2, Bitcoin halving estimated for tomorrow, April the 20th. I actually used good friend and listener of the show, Sensei's little tweet earlier for the timeline on that. Bitcoin wizards are up 0.4 Bitcoin. Been looking at the ordinals prices. We'll dive into that a little bit in a moment too. And finally, Runestone's crashed 20%. After Leonidas, the founder of the Runestones project, remember there's 100,000 of those, announces a crowd fund to go for one of the first 10 runes. He said, screw it, this is a quote, provenance matters. Runestone is going for one of the first 10 runes. 100% of the BTC sent to this donation address in the next 24 hours will go to network fees to Etch Dog. And remember, he's said to Runestone holders they're going to get 3 coins, Dog being the first one. And he's going to go for one of the first 10, and that's going to cost more. So we're going to have a big discussion about that. He says it's an optional donation. You will get nothing in return. It is not a pre-sale. So far, and this was a tweet not too long ago, it said only 10 hours left to donate to help Runestones get to the low rune number. They had raised 2.23 Bitcoin, which is $144,000, and 2,436 wallets had donated. So that is pretty interesting. Some notable sales. Before we get to a discussion on all this, is Xcopy Slave sold to prominent collector Bat Soup Yum for 315 ETH. That's $960,000, I think. Pretty outrageous. Congrats to Bats on that. It's a really cool piece as well. I'm showing it for the people who are watching in on YouTube and live on X. ACK had a big sale as well. Art selling pretty well in the last couple of days. The But Wait for My Bags piece sold for 28.69 ETH as well. So a hell of a lot selling there. Crypto art, like the really, really native crypto art, seems to be doing quite well at the moment. But that is the price action. Those are some of the headlines. Legendary, before we get into the big conversations and the headlines there, is there anything particularly on your mind as we draw to the close this week and looking forward into the halving?
Apart from the typical price action, have a look at the Mintify heat map. One thing stood out is Today the gaming project that has also a very, very strong AI component. Their mint was a free mint. The Ancient Seeds did run up to 1.5 ETH and are down 12% on the day. Today, also the staking of those assets had started, where depending on your staking duration, you will collect points. And it's interesting to see that with the staking, the price corrected a bit more. But given the fact that it was a free mint, I know the supply is rather low. It's still holding up pretty strongly. I do have one of those, so full disclosure on that commentary of mine. But to me, it says a lot about the continued conversation that we have on gaming, despite missing the very, very interesting discussion yesterday on how strong that narrative still is. But obviously, that's overshaded by BTC halving and runes.
Yeah, fair enough. It's good to point that out before we get into the more bigger conversation around the BTC stuff, because we want to know what else is going on. A quick point for people to know, which I think is just really an interesting thing from behind the scenes for us. You know that we started to do clips. We do them every day on X. You probably see those on the Modern Market Twitter account. What you may not see necessarily is on our YouTube account. We've also been putting those shorts over there. And in behind the scenes there, we can obviously see like how the views are going and how the likes and interactions are going. And one of the things we've noticed, admittedly not on like a huge sample size, is that gaming like focused clips like really outperform. And to the extent that we have always thought that media is a great indicator, when you get engagement, is a great indicator for either like demand that is incoming or about to come. It's just very interesting to me to note how much gaming captures people's attention. So that's an interesting observation. I hope you guys, Legendary, anything else on that before we throw to Sammy?
Nothing to add on that specifically, no.
Okay, Sammy, what are you looking at here? We've got all kinds of things up and down, maybe a little bit of a quieter day in the market, but before we get into the main headlines, what's catching your attention?
Yeah, I think a lot of these are ups and downs. Like we've seen Lacerjets come off a pretty big rally. I think that was down yesterday and it's back up again. That's kind of following the Milady's kind of hype, given it's the same artist from Bitcoin Puppets. And there's rumors that they'll be bridging to Bitcoin. I think the My Pet Hooligan, that's just come off the announcement around the investors. That came out yesterday. And I think that's a bit of a, probably people were pricing that in already. And I think that's now cooled off a little bit. So just a bit of up and down. I think Mochaverse has had a bit of a slump recently and that's back up. So I think a lot of this Mintify heat map isn't necessarily reflective of underlying performance. It's just kind of just people trading around news. I think it's too important. But I think on the Bitcoin ordinal side, I was looking at the wizards, the Bitcoin wizards. And I heard the backstory, I think it was last week when I caught up with someone and they were telling me about the origination of like magic internet money, and the person that's going to inscribe or get the first tag magic internet money as a rune will probably absolutely fly. So it'll be interesting to see when we get into that deeper discussion, how that's going to perform.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I know, I thought, yeah, okay. Yeah, it's very, very interesting that, just to your point on the ETH stuff, the volatility is kind of a point I've been making for a little bit as well, but what you said just reminded me of it. There's enough volatility here again to just be trading in and out of this stuff based on news. Like Mochaverse is up 4% again today. And like at those high prices, there's a reasonable chance that you can like keep kind of profiting on ETH. Admittedly, that is one of the collections which does have royalties enforced. So maybe it's not as easy. But yeah, Remelios are up 6%, Milady's are up 3%. Lacerjet's up 13% after a big dip down. Just like a lot of volatility here, which yes, people don't always like, but at the same time, there's opportunity, I guess, if you wanted to actually be in and out of this stuff potentially. Legendary, I don't know if you have a reflection there before we go into the kind of weekly roundup.
Yeah, I think at least at a smaller scale, that's something you can trade. I think it's not a trade that you can make if you come in with a couple hundred ETH and you're like, oh, I'm going to trade on this news and on that news, because the volume of things is just too little for that. But if you have a smaller bag to play around with, that could actually be a very, very nice and profitable side hustle to go after.
Okay. Interesting reflections there. It's Friday, so the thing we're going to do before we get into the main headlines is just go through the main headlines of the week and just try to get a sense of which of these key pieces of information and news from my newsletter, the snapshot, which goes out every single Friday at 20 minutes prior to this moment now at 7 a.m. Eastern time, just to kind of see what we think is important, what we think is worth keeping an eye on in the next few days. So I'm going to take us through this, make sure we have good handle on what the key themes are, and then consider Legendary and Sammy will have to pick independently something that they think is worth keeping an eye on as we move forward. Not the same thing as well. Okay, first we had Yuga Labs selling Heavy Metal and Legends of the Mara IP to Far Away. The Yuga assets temporarily pumped. I think they've probably given back that pump already. The key takeaway for me was that it seems like there was an admission that they not really a true gaming DNA company. That was a quote from their own statement. And I guess they need to focus on the club now. And the question remains what that really precisely looks like. So interested to see where that goes. Definitely the news from yesterday about Binance launching Megadrop, which is a token platform with airdrops and quests. I think that's a big money maker. I wrote that the big business will lie with the launch pads for these tokens, who can capture the volume on their platforms, earn fees, and provide more holistic support services for the launchers. I think a lot of people will want that, and I've noticed people wanting to go in that direction. Got the MAGA meme coin Trump partnering with the former Trump advisor Roger Stone. And got the broader point that we spoke about a couple of days ago, Parcel and Sharky launching at 45 million FDV and 500 million FDV to broad market disappointment. We were kind of discussing to what extent this is going to be a continued trend. Are our expectations out of line because they've got too big? To what extent is or should we continue to be maybe disappointed given the number of tokens coming to market and the amount of demand that there is relative to those? And then broadly, crypto being down with the Iran-Israel conflict. It was broadly down, and yet we saw a little bit of a bounce yesterday, which is maybe counterintuitive after we heard news that there was an additional attack. So maybe that means we're out of the woods. Some people were drawing comparisons with Russia and suggesting that that conflict people cared about a bit, as in markets cared about it a bit, and then people were quite happy to move on. Does that repeat in some way when it comes to this conflict and markets' reaction to it? Sammy, let's go to you first. Out of these pieces of news from the week, what's one which you're kind of monitoring, keeping your eye on, thinking that that's going to be something important moving forward?
So just on the Parcel and Sharkify comments you made around the tokenomics, I mean, I had the pleasure of digging into the Mochaverse tokenomics a little bit more, and to be honest, it's I mean, it's structured a little bit different to how some of these other ones are. It's a very long vesting schedule, and actually it is very community focused. And I'm thinking that
what were the details, Sammy, just so people can know?
Yeah, so there's probably about, I think it's about 50 something percent is community, 10% liquidity, and then the remainder, like 37%, I think it was, is for the team. But the team doesn't get any unlock for 18 months. And that's after the actual fully vesting of the community sale. And the network incentives are actually about 30 something percent. So the thing that surprised me though is the unlocks on day one, and just looking at how that might play out. And I'm just comparing this to the previous ones that we've had recently, where like Parcel absolutely dumped. It dumped significantly from, I think it was something like $2 down to about 40 something cents. And I think that the way that Mochaverse are doing it, I got the impression from the timeline, people weren't necessarily happy about the size of the unlock for that public sale, and also the vesting over, I think it's like a 52-week period, so over a year. But actually, if you look at it in the context of the wider,
it's 5-month vesting, 3-month cliff, 52-week vesting, right?
I don't think there's I think there's a TGE, and then I think there's a short cliff, and then it's 52 weeks. But I think compared to all the other unlocks, it's pretty beneficial. And I'm very interested to see how that, I think it worked out at 0.6 of the total supply on that day is from the community sale. But if you compare that to the amount that's in the liquidity pool, which is around about 39%, like that's, if everyone's sold, it's not even going to move the dial on, I think. So it'll be interesting to see how, like, what they price it at in terms of coming out the gate with their sex partners and whoever it is, and whether they price it at something that's a ridiculously high valuation, but it doesn't move because there's no one really selling. And then they've also got the Mocha List partnership, so the CoinList partnership after, which is effectively giving you access to all these other tokens from potential portfolio partners. So I think there could be very little sell pressure, significant buy pressure from wanting to get exposure. And it'll be interesting to see what they do with the airdrop of the Mocha token for NFT holders. So yeah, I think like coming out of this like bit of a dull downer from previous like tokenomics or airdrops, I think this will be interesting to see play out through April or whenever it's going to be.
Super interesting. I actually don't disagree with any of your assessment there. I'm fairly bullish on that coming out. This community sale is taking place at a $350 million FDV, and because of the tokenomics you just described, I'm fairly bullish on it too. But let's see. Legendary, would love to hear your thoughts on that, and then maybe just take it in the direction of another piece of news that you think you want to keep monitors, over in the next short to medium term.
Yeah, I don't think that the tokenomics are surprising in any way. I do think that Animoca is way too relevant of a company to go for those squeezeonomics and come up with a super low circulating supply initially and try to pump the shit out of that token. That's just absolutely not on brand for Animoca. And so I'm absolutely not surprised to see that the tokenomics are designed in the way they are. And I think they're very, very well designed. In terms of the other news, I think to me, Binance, the Megadrop platform, is a super interesting one because obviously there's multiple reasons why I like that news. Obviously, we have something we talked about on the show quite often, which is that competition between launchpads. You have CDFI, you have Jeremy Horn with Xterra, you have so many other launchpads that are coming out. You have marketplaces like Magic Eden who try to act as a launchpad. You have preferred launchpads for L2s. And obviously, a lot of that is now being also driven by all the social farming campaigns that we are seeing. Also to the extent that centralized exchanges start to look at the performance that you have where they don't want to list you. What Binance had going on was their launchpad, obviously, was the farming with BNB for coins that launched with a launch pool. So for them, it makes sense, given how big they are as an exchange, to just extend that program and have their own launchpad, have their own questing platform, and basically build out that business arm too, because it's gotten too big and Binance did not have a stake in it to that extent. So now they're doing it and it makes perfect sense. And I think it's still something that's pretty underrated. People have been farming with their BNB, have been farming the launch pool tokens and making, I think, between 2 to 3% of the stake back on average. But just throwing the BNB into launch pool tokens and now having that questing platform is, again, a very interesting extension and something that I will be definitely using.
I love it. I think that's a really, really helpful analysis of the situation, particularly tying it in with other launch pads and just identifying that this is the direction many of the bigger companies want to go in, like capture all those people so they get all those participants on their platform. Definitely something I've noticed too. Appreciate that analysis, Legendary. We're on the half hour, so we want to turn the show into the halving show. We want to talk more Bitcoin now from a variety of angles because there's a few things going on. I think what we'll do is we'll kind of talk about price action as we go into the halving first. I've got a couple of tweets to read on that. Then we're going to think about a little bit more to do with the runes and the ordinals and that side of things. So we're going to kind of split it into two, and that's how we'll approach it. So the first tweet that I have for us to discuss. Maybe I'll do 2 of these in a row so that we kind of, because I think they're kind of related. Fred Krueger, my favorite Bitcoin bull, suggested this when it comes to the halving. There's a cool chart which I'll try to explain for people who are just listening in, but for people watching, it should be quite helpful. He writes this. He says there are 4 clear peaks in Bitcoin price, and as of now, only 3 halvings. Halvings do not explain Bitcoin cyclicality with a 6-month delay. This is statistically not true. He goes on to say, it's tempting to try to explain everything with supply shock, but as one of his friends shows, this is pretty much 100% false. So I think what he's arguing here is that it's not as simple as supply shock and things go up. And according to the graph that he's sharing, which again, we're trusting this data that he's provided, you kind of have these points in time where the halving takes place. And actually, from what I can see, the charts actually go down for a period of time and then slowly kind of slope up over time to reach another peak a little bit later. Sometimes years, it looks like years later, according to this. Would love to hear your thoughts on this, Legendary. First, would love to hear Funky's thoughts on this as well, if he's able to view it or if he's able to see it. But maybe I'll share maybe a competing perspective or an alternative perspective at the same time, where Hunter Horsley, who is the CEO of Bitwise, one of the ETF providers, said this: I think people are dramatically underestimating the halving. The market has never priced it in before and won't have priced it in this time. For the prior 3 halvings, after investors spent months discussing if it was priced in, here's what happened in the 12 months after each halving. So this is quite important data. First, 2020, it was plus 5.4x. In 2016, it was plus 2.8x. And in 2012, it was plus 88x. So he says a 100K Bitcoin is plus 67% from here. The impact of the halving isn't based on the views of fully deployed existing holders. It's a function of if there will be meaningful, consistent new demand alongside the reduction in the daily availability of natural sellers. From my seat, I see consistent new demand ahead in 2024 and the setup for an impactful halving. My reading of this, Legendary, is that these kind of competing views, even though ultimately they both think it's going up and to the right. What's your read on these particular bits of data? Would love to hear Sammy's thoughts on this and Funky's as well. Legendary first. Legendary? Hello?
I think we might have lost him. I don't know if.
Oh, you're here though. Okay. Yeah. All right. So Legendary looks like he is frozen at the moment. Sammy, do you want to come in on this first? What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very hard to. I mean, there's a lot of complexities, a lot of variables, but I think from a high level, I think the difference this cycle, and this is probably leaning into what they're saying. I think the previous guy talking about demand is you've got institutional demand this time around. And I think to get it to that next level where you have it, those lofty 6-figure price points, you're going to have that institutional demand because that's where a lot of the capital is. Whereas I think the previous 3 cycles, it wasn't necessarily needed to get it there. I think retail alone could get it there. I don't know. What was my other point? Yeah, I think that was the main point I think I was going to make. But it is, I mean, if you look at the chart alone, it does. I don't know if there's much historical experience as well. Like you've had 3 cycles. Bitcoin's fairly nascent. But it's the oldest digital asset we've got in terms of a comparison. But it's once we've got maybe another cycle's experience, you probably infer it a little bit more. But I think this is probably going to be the last cycle where you have that, because I think the next cycle you'd effectively have to have a ridiculous amount of institutional interest, and that's probably where the pension funds and that the likes of the those kind of funds come into play, because that's where the significant amount of capital is. But yeah,
Okay.
it's interesting. It's very hard to predict.
Yeah. Legendary, I think you're back with us now. What were your thoughts? I hope you caught all of the kind of setup, the two opinions on the on the impact of the halving. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I am back. Caught all of the setup, code both post as well as Sammy's take. I think I'm with Hunter Horsley more. I do think that we have that constant demand, obviously being caused by the ETFs. I mean, generally, I do agree with Sammy that those 3 cycles, 3 halvings, is just not enough data, and it's certainly not enough data to be able to predict the volatility impact of each halving now and in the future. But I do think the more important point, and that's the point that that the Bitwise CEO is making, is exactly having that constant demand, is exactly having the continued buy pressure due to the ETFs, which is something we haven't had before. And the general stock market is not in a terrible condition. I mean, obviously, the world seems like it's going to shit with so many conflicts happening very close to home at the same time. But the stock markets are still doing well. Sorry, there was just room service. So I was saying that the stock markets are doing well. We are very close to all-time highs, or are on all-time highs on several levels. The price of BTC is pretty good right now. Yes, we've seen a correction, but we're super close to all-time high. Essentially, if you just look at it in terms of a percentage, and we just did touch all-time a couple ways ago. So if that momentum continues, I don't see why the halving shouldn't be like positively impactful, even in over the next couple of months. But what I do think, and that's my final point on that, is that after the halving, often we've seen like additional volatility for like maybe 4 to 8 weeks after that. So that's probably something to keep in mind, because if everyone expects things to go up in a straight line after the halving, that's typically not what will happen, because people will adjust their positions and will try to counter trade that.
Okay, I like those perspective. It made me have this follow-up question, but I think I'll happily throw this to Funky, even though I was going to ask it to you. Funky, would like to bring you in on this, my friend. Legendary's talking about, maybe there not being enough data on the halving to be entirely certain. And my question is more like, what was it like when the other halvings? Was there this sentiment, or with everyone feeling so certain? Because now I guess what people are doing are writing tweets like this, where they're saying, look, this is what happened last time in 2020. This is what happened in 2016. This is what happened in 2012. Therefore, it is certainly going to do this. Whereas, was that sentiment there before? Because typically when something becomes so consensus in this space, then it goes the other way. And so I'm wondering if we're in that kind of territory where people are way too certain about this based on essentially 3 data points. And yeah, I was just curious how it was going through it the first time and how you're thinking about it going into this time. Funky.
Thanks so much, B. And Legendary, sure, it was room service. Anyhow, to your point, B, I was just going to say a couple things. I pulled up the YouTube so I could see the tweets and actually look at the data. I think it's probably much more like what Freddy Krueger is talking about, when you see that logarithmic chart and it's just slowly climbing up. So much of this extrapolation is done on, to your point, very few data points, right? Like, and I think it's misleading to look at the halving the last time, when I was really starting to pay attention to crypto again back in 2020. We had just come off the COVID crash. And I think people were just scared out of their minds. And so I think that also somewhat reflects the fact that you had this 5x, because you had arguably an artificial low. Had you not had that COVID panic, I don't know if Bitcoin would have started at such a low price and then gone up from there. You have to take into consideration just the law of diminishing returns. I mean, yes, we have this incredible demand from institutions, but I'm already starting to see what I would consider, this is the 3rd time on the merry-go-round, very alarming moon boy math. Oh, Bitcoin's going to hit 350,000. It's going to get to $500,000. I really think these numbers are incredibly far-fetched. Will there be a 6-figure Bitcoin? Absolutely. I do not think, I think personally, Pico top might be 150 if we even get there. I just can't see. There's just too many other macroeconomic uncertainties. Look at the stuff that's happening. Yes, maybe we have a temporary shrug of the Israel situation, but if this thing becomes bigger, that could be a problem. If the Fed continues to be hawkish, now they're starting to signal maybe there won't be any rate cuts. That could be hawkish. All these things are going to impact sort of the macroeconomic conditions and the liquidity for whether or not Bitcoin is going to thrive in the way that we all just are suddenly anticipating. Oh, it's just going to happen. I don't know. I'd be much more cautious about this because I've been through a few cycles. Everybody starts talking about pie in the sky numbers, and I just don't know if they're going to get there. Plus, you have to think at the end of the day, there's right now, I think, $6.4 billion worth of shorts on Bitcoin or something insane. Institutional money runs this game. If they want to yank this market up and down and sideways, they have the firepower to do so. We're just swimming in their seas right now. So, I mean, maybe they come and they get it up to a Pico top that they decide this is good enough, shut it down, let's crash this market. I mean, look at what happened in the previous, going back 2 cycles in 2017. What actually was launched? Bitcoin futures. And all of a sudden you could start having people pile on shorts, and they just crashed it all to hell, throughout 2018. So I just tell people to be cautious with a lot of the moon math that's already coming out around halving.
Look, I think there's a lot of wisdom there. One of the maybe unrelated thoughts I had, Funky, something I've been thinking about is how the Fed is essentially everything relates back to NFT projects for me now. They're doing their best impression of NFT founders, just like being very mysterious, not providing the full details, maybe dropping those interest rates, maybe increasing them, just keeping the audience, keeping their holders in check. That's what the Fed is doing at the moment. But to your other points, you mentioned the scale which Fred Krueger has been sharing. He's been speaking a lot about the power law for Bitcoin, which kind of separates the conversation from the halving. And it's kind of just this idea that Bitcoin, yes, there'll always be volatility, but it's going up along this power law. And then you just have points in time where it's like almost overbought and it will be like too high, which means it just needs to come down, and then it will be too low and then it will need to go up. And then it's just kind of oscillating between those 2 points, up and to the right, over time. And look, I don't know if that's 100% the way it plays out. It's just an idea that or some language that I've heard used to describe it recently, which was quite persuasive to me. Sammy, do you have any reflections on that or anything that Funky said? And this idea of it being more of a power law potentially, as opposed to, focusing so much on these particular moments of supply shock?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen so many charts put into log and try to fit some sort of narrative. And sometimes I do wonder whether price follows narrative or narrative follows price. Because we try and make sense of market movements, but at the end of the day, if consensus is that price is too high, then it will come down. I do think that once the market becomes more mature, you're going to have all these algorithms trading to specific patterns, whether it's like Fibonacci or whatever. So I think you're going to end up trading to that, and that's partly why you see things like the price fall through a floor at certain price points, because that's where the general consensus is in terms of what that should be priced at, and everyone's following similar tools. So yeah, I think the power law stuff, I mean, it works nicely with networks. I mean, I think you've heard Moore's law, and the power of the value of the network is the sum of all the individual components. So the more people in that network, the more value it has. And I wonder if that ties into this like exponential chart that we're seeing with Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, especially in the earlier days. But I think those might shift as those underlying assets mature. I don't think that necessarily will hold true next cycle or the cycle after. I think that will probably end up plateauing out a little bit. But yeah, I think that's yeah. I don't really have much more of a deeper take than that. But
okay, I think those are all really, really fair points. One more broader point just on price before we hit ordinals and runes, which I think is a pretty important topic. We'll spend more time on that there. Had this post from Andrew Kang kind of calling a bottom on the kind of situation that we're in right now. I'm going to share it for the people watching in, as well as read it out for the people who are only listening in. He said, I think this was a couple of days ago, April the 19th. Oh no, it was today. In a few weeks, I think you can expect these buying opportunities as huge gifts. 60K BTC, $130 Sol, $2.3 WIF, and some other token I don't even know what it is. We will have an onslaught of ETF approval headlines as the rest of the countries follow the lead of the US. The second wave of ETF inflows will kick in as wealth asset management teams are cleared to solicit new customers for the ETF, and rumors of mainland China access to BTC ETF start to bubble up. Legendary, I know this is a topic we've touched on many, many times, often brought up by people in the East. I think the point that people in the West make is that the financial advisors haven't quite had enough opportunity to all mobilize. But when I think they're talking about it, they're just talking about the US. But what Andrew Kang here is suggesting is that, look, there's going to be lots of people following in the footsteps. And then on top of that, you have all the people who are going to enter in after the first set of people who've done their due diligence. Are you persuaded by this, Legendary? What are your thoughts on this kind of waterfall, cascading inflows, not just from the US, but elsewhere too?
First comment, the other token, Ton, is Ton coin. It's Telegram's coin based on their own blockchain that's been around for a couple of years. And it's actually up to date quite a lot. I'm partially persuaded by this. I don't think that following the lead of the US is necessarily the right term, as we've seen Hong Kong obviously coming out with an ETH ETF and with a very, very clear regulatory framework before the US. We've seen the European Union pushing for the MiCA regulation and also having ETFs in a couple of countries. So I still think that the US, when it comes to that, is like the most important marketplace globally speaking and the most important market globally speaking. So yes, I do think there will be other inflows. And obviously, I was a big advocate and fan of Hong Kong and their approach with regulatory framework, as well as having both ETFs at the same time. But I think that those effects will take more than just a couple of weeks, like Andrew Kang is putting, and this is the point that I disagree with in his post, to play out fully. That's a multi-year horizon that we're looking at, and certainly not something that plays out until summer.
Okay. I think that's very, very fair. Interesting conversation to be had there on where Bitcoin is going. I hope that was helpful. We did say we want to split this conversation into two, one for the kind of Bitcoin price action and thoughts there. And now we've also got ordinals and runes to speculate on at the same time. So let's look at some of the price action there, kind of set up a discussion that we're going to have. I see Confusion with us on stage. Would love to hear his thoughts as what I believe is a quantum cat holder and general like knowledgeable participant on the ordinals ecosystem. And then we'll go around the house as well to hear what we think. Obviously, one of the headlines today was that runestones have crashed 20% after Leonidas announced a crowdfund to go for one of the first 10 runes. Remember that, so the kind of design for this is that there's going to be these first 10 runes and it's going to be a bit of carnage trying to get them at the beginning. So people need to prepare with a lot of funds in order to do that. And Leonidas has asked for funding in order to do that from the community. It is not a pre-sale. You will not get anything in return. You will simply provide some funds in order for him to attempt to do this. And it looks like the market has not reacted well to that. Or not too well anyway. So we have runestones now at 0.06 BTC, down around 20%. There's still a lot of there's still a lot of activity on them. Like there's 88 buys pending right now. But remember, this is a 112,000 collection. It is, I think it had a high of about 0.09 Bitcoin, something around that. Maybe we'll go to Confusion straight away. Confusion, what were your thoughts on the runestones? What are your thoughts on the effect of the halving on ordinals more generally? Welcome to the stage, my friend. What are you thinking here? I can't hear Confusion. Can anyone else?
I hear him, B.
Oh
I hear
man,
him.
I can't hear. Legendary, can you hear?
So we can't hear via the StreamYard, but we can hear via the set profile through
Okay.
our phones.
Confusion, try and drop down or leave and come back. At least if someone can hear properly, then they can lead the conversation a bit. But if you just drop down the first time, and we'll try and get you back so we can hear your thoughts on it. Let's go to Legendary first then, as we work to get Confusion back with us. Legendary, what's your thinking here? What's your thought on this kind of community raise in order to go after these crucial first 10 runes? Is that a good strategy?
I think it's not a bad strategy. I don't know to what extent provenance will matter on that on in the long run. I think it's an argument that we like to bring very often, provenance, and it does matter, but it can't be created just in an as you wish manner. What I'm surprised to see is how strong the community reacted and how much Runestone stumped by that. Because end of the day, they did have a very nice run. Maybe some people were inclined to take profits before the halving and thought that they did have a top and were just waiting on a news that was a bit more negative and create a bit more doubt and allowed them to like basically exit that market. But I was a bit surprised by the reaction, also in a couple groups and in a couple groups and DMs that I got regarding that, where people started calling Leonidas a grifter because of that. I'm thinking at the end of the day, so many people got that airdrop, and it's actually quite valuable, and it did have quite of a nice pump. And wanting to do that, crowdsource again, it's not the most outstanding, most intelligent idea I've ever seen, but I also don't think it's terrible. So I am, if anything, surprised by the strong reaction by the market.
Interesting. Okay, that's one take. I have a feeling Sensei disagrees from some of the reactions in with the emojis, but let's go to Confusion first. Hear your thoughts on runestones specifically. Maybe we'll keep the conversation here first, then we'll go to Sensei. Then we'll broaden it out to maybe the ordinals ecosystem more generally before we then hit on runes. So Confusion, hopefully we can hear you now, my friend. What are your thoughts here? No, I can't hear. Sammy, can you hear? Sammy,
Well, I can hear through my phone, but I can't hear through StreamYard.
Okay, Sensei, can you give it a go? We could hear Funky. So Sensei, can you give it a go? God damn it. Why is it only Funky that we can hear? No, we can't hear you either, Sensei. Funky, can we hear you? Just do a quick check. I think we can still hear you.
Yeah, I mean, I can hear both Confusion and K Sensei.
Funky, do you want to lead the conversation for a few minutes?
Yeah, sure. I mean,
Honestly.
I think the rest of the audience on X can hear. So, Confusion, why don't you just go ahead and chime in and let the rest of the audience, because I think everybody who's in the Twitter space itself can hear fine. So, why don't we just go ahead and get your thoughts?
Yeah, do that. I'm going to try and put subtitles on.
K-Sensei. Thank you guys for that input. Are you back?
Yeah. So can I actually come in? So I think I've been following along on the transcript thing. Two interesting points which I agree with, and some follow-up questions from me. The first one is I've heard lots of people here as well, who are ordinals people, say yes, like people are not being open about the names of the tickers that they're going for. Because as you said, like there's going to be loads of competition, and if you tell anyone what you're going for, then someone's going to get it before you if you're not that technical. So you can't tell people what it is. So that's the first thing. So what you're saying, Sensei, kind of lines up with what I've been hearing. The second thing, this is more of a question for you, and maybe if anyone else knows, but my understanding is you can't even get the 3 letter tickers yet, because they're doing the they're doing longer words first, and then they're doing shorter ones after. So am I right in thinking then, is it not a completely impossible task to even get like a dog ticker rune thing? I don't know if that question is perfectly formulated. I think you can tell what I mean. If there's anything that I haven't explained properly, please do elaborate, Sensei. But yeah, take over there. What are your thoughts?
To like whatever ticker. So basically, whatever tickers everyone is announcing right now, it's kind of what they hope is going to trade under on dexes and potential sex listings. Like, you know, you can call it whatever colloquially. But another thing is that you can include an inscription with your rune as sort of a logo for it, which is what I'm assuming he wants to do with the dog, and what I'm expecting someone will do beforehand if he's so cavalier with how he wants to inscribe it. Yeah.
Interesting. The audio is actually back, so we could hear that properly. I hope that stays. That's really awesome. Okay, so it sounds like it's not. I want to make sure I get this right. Is it possible for them to go and get the dog ticker in the first set of runes? Am I even understanding this properly? Confusion. Hopefully we can hear you now too. Like, yes or no? Is it possible?
So I think it'll be a 13-letter ticker, right? So I think he's not said what that is. It'll be like the dog's name.
Got
and
it.
I
Got
think
it. Got
that's
it.
what
Okay.
he's gonna try and get. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That at least makes some sense then. I was under the impression that the 3-letter ticker would be the one they were going for, and then that wasn't even possible, which obviously makes no sense. But then you guys are, from what I could tell from your opinions, some of his other strategy also makes no sense. So it's not necessarily the case that things that make no sense are not on the table for executing on the plan. Okay, so we've kind of discussed what we thought there on the... Oh, wow. Are we at time? Damn. We've actually run out of time for the show. I was so engrossed reading these these little subtitle things that we've completely lost track of time. Look, it's going to be very exciting. It's going to be very interesting. We discussed what would happen on price action. We discussed what would happen with some certain ordinals. The Rune stuff, just from a headline perspective, I might just kind of echo some concerns that people have had, that if you're not particularly technically minded, Legendary mentioned earlier, like it's going to be a challenging time to compete with people who are more technical, and that will be a concern. We think certain people will make a lot of money, certain people could potentially lose a lot in this time. But look, we're going to be here to report when we are back on Monday. Just a reminder, we do this every single day, Monday to Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, 12 p.m. GMT, every day of the week, to discuss all things to do with the modern market. That is the crypto market, the NFT market, and ideally how to make some or a lot of money on the internet. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to my legendary co-hosts, Legendary and Sammy. Thank you to our brilliant speakers, Confusion, Oxy, Funky, and Sensei. And we will be back with you on Monday. Take care. Have a good weekend. We will see you on the other side. Bye-bye.